Imagine a quiet, tree-lined street in downtown Sacramento in the 1980s. This is F Street at 1426. There sits a two-story, small, powder blue Victorian boarding house. The homeowner is a pillar of her community, well-respected, seemingly kind. She tends to her garden, hands out cookies, and promises vulnerable people a safe place to stay. To local charities and social workers, she was a hero who took in those that no one else would. But beneath the flowers and apricot trees in her garden, and behind the lace curtains in her windows, something sinister was happening. The truth came to light on November 11th, 1988, when police arrived at the home, searching for missing 51-year-old Bert Montoya. This boarding house was Montoya's last known address, and little did police know this disappearance would lead them to an elderly female serial killer. Rumors of suspicious activity in the homeowner's back garden led police to dig. They would ultimately find the human remains of 7 victims. In today's episode, we're exploring how a grandmotherly caretaker became one of America's most infamous serial killers, known as the Death House Landlady. We'll walk through her troubled past, the twisted schemes she used to target society's most vulnerable, and the investigation that would finally expose the horrors hidden at 1426 F Street. If you lived in Sacramento, California in the 1980s, you will recognize this name. She is one of the most infamous female serial killers in the United States. This is the story of Dorothea Puente. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Perplexity, a mystery podcast. As always, I'm your host, Kadra. If you're new to the show, hello and welcome. I tell tales every single week that have perplexed me. So if you love a good mystery that leaves you wanting more, don't worry, you're in the right place. And if you end up enjoying today's true crime deep dive all about Dorothea Puente, I would love if you continue to follow along. If you are a returning listener, hello, my friends. Welcome back. I'm happy you're here today. This has been on my mind for the last several weeks. I've been deep diving Dorothea Puente, and a TikTok user actually suggested this quite a while back, Ridgeback Mom. So thank you for recommending this. I'm finally getting to it, and wow. I had never heard of Dorothea Puente. I will tell you guys now, this is a very sad story, very upsetting. So trigger warning, as always, for true crime cases. We're going to be getting into murder, of course, also abuse and suicide. So please take care while listening. And there are a lot of sources that I used for today's episode, including a couple of books. So those will all be down in the show notes. Without further ado, let's dive right in to Dorothea Puente. So Dorothea Gray was born in San Bernardino County in the Redlands of California on January 9th, 1929. She was the 6th of 7 children. Her father, Jesse, was a World War I veteran who suffered from lung issues and PTSD. He was once a successful farmer, but after the war, he turned to alcohol and became suicidal. Jesse would repeatedly threaten to kill himself, holding a gun to his head in front of his own children. So this obviously put his kids into extreme duress, and only when they were in total hysteria would Jesse cool down. As for Trudy, Dorothea's mother, she was a mother only in name. She often remarked how much she hated being a mother. Trudy was not even slightly maternal. She was mean. And she, like Jesse, was an alcoholic. She was also abusive and neglectful. She was known to abandon her kids for days at a time, sometimes locking the younger children in a closet while she took off for several days on benders. There were also times that she would come back from these benders, vomit everywhere, and expect the children to clean it up. So because of severe neglect from Jessie and Trudy, Dorothea was raised by her siblings. They would often scavenge in the streets for food. Sometimes their neighbors would step in and feed them and clothe them. During Dorothea's time in the streets, she was also sexually abused. Her neighborhood was filled with a lot of Hispanic people, and Dorothea would later say it was often the Hispanic families that would care for her the most. And you'll see this come up a lot later in the story. She learned a decent amount of Spanish because of this as well. Then Jessie got sick, and the Grays had to move to LA to be closer to the VA hospital for his treatments. Dorothea's father was now unable to work, so Trudy started doing sex work to make ends meet. The children also took up various odd jobs, so Dorothea started working when she was very young. In 1937, Dorothea's father, Jesse Gray, would die from tuberculosis complications. Dorothea was only 8 years old. Dorothea's mother, Trudy, then finally lost custody of the children, but this would, of course, result in the children going into the adoption agency, into orphanages, and they were all split up. This happened after a family member finally reported the abuse. But this was incredibly difficult for Dorothea because she was now separated from her siblings who had raised her. So this was like the only semblance of a family that she had ever had. I think this would have really, really messed with her psyche. And again, you see things like this throughout the story, how she's unable to attach to people. When Dorothea was 10 years old, she was sent to live in an orphanage in Ontario, California. During this time, she ran away several times, having difficulty attaching to or trusting anyone. And she would later say that she was taken in by some nice families, but she just couldn't bring herself to grow attached. She felt she was a lone wolf. Dorothea's mother, Trudy, also later died in a motorcycle accident after she ran off with her boyfriend's motorcycle gang. From the time that Dorothea was 16 years old, she also, like her mother, became involved in sex work. Dorothea would also marry several times throughout her life, and each time she married, she would tell these insanely lavish, embellished, ridiculous stories. She would go under false names. She would lie about her age. So her husbands never really knew who she was until it was too late. Her first marriage was when she was only 16, and she married a man named Fred. However, her marriage certificate said she was 30, and she went under a false name. So it seems Fred didn't know how young she actually was. And this is where we start to see what will be a never-ending pattern. Dorothea was a pathological liar. Throughout her life, she lived in survival mode, saying whatever lie was convenient for her at the time to get people to like and trust her. And it seems some of the lies were out of childhood fantasy, meaning she really, really wanted them to be true, and some seemed so real to her that she let herself to believe them. But others were just plain ridiculous or for her convenience. She gave birth to a daughter in 1946, followed by a second child less than a year later. This is where you begin to see Dorothea's coldness, and similar to Trudy, she was unable to attach. She wasn't maternal. So she started drinking, and she ended up giving her children away. Public documents suggest one of Dorothea's daughters was placed very quickly into the care of a relative, and the other was put up for adoption. These children were with her first husband, Fred, and she did all of this without telling him. So this obviously would create a huge rift in their marriage. This second child that she put up for adoption was actually given away while Fred was at work. She had the baby, put her up for adoption, and didn't tell him. She signed away all the rights, and Fred was heartbroken. Soon after this, Dorothea got pregnant by another man. So, as if their marriage wasn't already shattered, this was the final straw for Fred. She was 19 at this point, and Fred left her. He couldn't take it anymore. When people would ask what had happened to Fred, Dorothea would also lie and say that he was a war hero who had died in battle. She would tell this story for many years to many people. She also began her life of crime, forging checks, and she eventually got caught. This would be the first time of many that Dorothea would get caught, though, and she never seemed to stay in jail for long. So at this time, she was sentenced to a year, but she served just 4 months. Then Dorothea got married again. Her second marriage was to a Swedish sea merchant named Axel Johansson, and she once again told him extravagant stories and went under a false name. Dorothea claimed that she was a former professional chef turned rockette. She claimed her parents were Egyptian and Israeli, and that her last husband, Fred, had died in battle. When Axel was away for work, Dorothea continued to drink heavily. She also gambled away all of Axel's money and brought other men back to the house. It was around this time that Dorothea saw the world of caregiving open up to her. Back then, there were minimal qualifications to take people in or do medical care. Dorothea saw opportunity, dollar signs. She started telling people that she was a holistic doctor and healer. Of course, none of this was true. She had no medical training whatsoever. But Dorothea was so charismatic, so charming and seemingly innocent that people very often believed her. She also opened an undercover brothel, so it's like she would really do anything she could to make money. She got caught running this illegal brothel, and when she did, she initially tried to lie to police. They did like this sting operation where they showed up. It was really weird. They put this powder on their hands and touched the people that were in the brothel so that they could mark them and prove later what they were doing. But they were touching their boobs and stuff. It was really weird. It's a weird story. But she initially was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea I was even in a brothel. Girl, come on. She served just 90 days in jail as well. And she was still married to Axel Johansson throughout this time. He started becoming abusive, and he had her committed to a psychiatric facility, but Dorothea ran away. They ended up getting divorced a couple years later. In 1981, Dorothea rented a new apartment on her own, going under another false name. She went by Sharon Johansson, keeping the last name of her former husband, Axel. She soon began to take people in, and she treated the place as a boarding house. She called the place the Samaritans. This was absolutely illegal. She was not licensed. Dorothea began targeting vulnerable populations: alcoholics, homeless, intellectually disabled, medically fragile adults. She would agree to take them in, care for them, so long as they agreed to make her the payee on their government checks. She also had an assistant, TJ Hosley, who would run things for her when she was away. And that's one of the mysteries about Dorothea, is how many people knew what she was actually doing and were accomplices. Soon after this, Dorothea met her third husband, Roberto Jose Puente, leading to her infamous name, Dorothea Puente. Roberto was 20 years younger than Dorothea, and they got married in Mexico City. But Roberto, similar to how Dorothea was in her prior marriages, was unfaithful. In response to one of these affairs, Dorothea knocked out Roberto in a single punch, which is obviously spousal abuse and shows how strong she was. It's also pretty insane that she cheated on her prior husbands and that was okay, but God forbid someone do it to her. Roberto then stole her car and fled back to Mexico City. This was the last she would ever see of him. The city also found out about her illegal boarding house, the Samaritans, and shut it down. But, of course, this was not the end of the story either. Dorothea was charming and determined. She somehow managed to move and open up another boarding house in the 70s at 2100 F Street, and this was not far at all from the first one that she opened. This place was also much larger, so she could take in more victims. A 16-bedroom Victorian house. She had a full staff, holiday meals, and invited social workers over regularly, which shows how much money she had been making. She had been raking in all these government checks. How else would she have afforded this? The tenants would then hand over their financial rights to her, and if they agreed to do this, they were seemingly treated well. But if they saw into her scheme and refused, these people were neglected and kept secret, hidden in the basement. So there would be all of these people trapped in the basement while she's having these parties with social workers and politicians upstairs. It was insane. In town, people saw her as this grandmother and a pillar of the community, a hero, this woman who could cook amazing food and had these immaculate, gorgeous, colorful gardens. She would fuss over her vegetables in rose gardens. She took her teeth out in conversation, faked medical conditions, and she told people she was 10 or 15 years older than she actually was. When she lost her good looks, she realized that she could get away with more if she played up this grandmother role. She was continuously praised in the community as this sweet old lady who took in those less fortunate. She ran all of these charity events, hosted these immaculate dinners and fundraisers, and she grew these deep connections in politics and with social workers. In fact, a lot of her victims were referred by their own social workers. She had a room in the house filled with fake medical degrees as well. She had even at one point convinced an actual doctor that she was a doctor, and he, without asking for any kind of proof, invited her to come work for him and be his assistant. I don't think that this actually ended up happening, but that just goes to show how many people bought in to Dorothea's lies. But not everyone believed Dorothea's ruse. A retired social worker named Mildred Ballinger says she first met Puente in the late 1970s. Puente told her that she had cancer, but this woman lied so much that Ballinger realized this woman couldn't keep her story straight, because every time Ballinger would talk to Puente, the cancer had seemingly moved to a different part of her body. First she had breast cancer, then she had brain cancer, then it was liver. Puente also spoke some passable Spanish, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode. She was often taken in by Hispanic families when she was growing up. So she knew enough Spanish between that and living in California that she could pass as Hispanic to some people. She lied and said that she had been born in Mexico and grew up with 17 siblings. So all of this is interesting to me. It seems like this was like one of those fantasy narratives and not necessarily manipulative, because if you lie about this, it doesn't necessarily hurt anyone, but it just goes to show how deeply, in my opinion, that she longed for a real family. She had never had that. She also donated to Hispanic arts and education programs in her community while providing cheap medical care to her tenants and other patients, for which she would make house calls. So that was another thing she did. She had like all these crazy schemes spinning, and one of them was showing up to make house calls because she was this holistic doctor. Sometimes she would also tell people she was a nurse. It was really whatever fit her narrative at the time. She would sometimes tell people she was a nurse in World War II, so she was really experienced. The local Spanish community even published newspapers about Dorothea Puente. They began referring to her lovingly as La Doctora. She became known as the godmother of the Spanish artists as well, sending her stolen money to charities and artists throughout the Spanish community. But Dorothea wasn't just conning, stealing money. She was doing something much more dangerous and dark. Darker than anyone could have ever imagined. Neighbors began to first grow suspicious of Puente when she took in a local man named Chief and quote-unquote adopted him. So Chief was this very gentle, homeless man in the community who suffered from alcoholism. She took him in as a tenant and also hired him as a handyman. But she had Chief doing some weird things around her house. So, for example, one of the jobs she gave him was digging in the basement and removing a bunch of soil and garbage, quote unquote, from around the property. And he then put in a new concrete slab in the basement. Shortly after he completed these jobs, Chief vanished. He was never seen again. For 4 short months, Puente was also married to another man named Pedro Montalvo. He initially was a tenant and worked on the grounds for Dorothea. He was also an alcoholic. The marriage didn't last and was soon annulled. She would continue, though, to use his last name over the years at times for various crimes. In 1977, Puente also got in trouble with the law, getting caught forging checks again. She was asked to go to therapy, but wasn't really given any jail time. And this would be the second time that Dorothea lost a boarding house, and I think the fourth time at this point that you would think that's where the story ends, but of course not. She began working odd jobs and quickly went back to forging checks. In 1979, she began working as a nursing aide with no credentials. Soon after this, she rented another place, a second-floor apartment at 1426 F Street, a powder blue 2-story Victorian home with a beautiful back garden. Keep in mind, this is 1979. Police wouldn't knock on her door and dig up her garden until nearly a decade later. She lived on the second floor of this apartment for some time and often would babysit the landlord's children, and she was known to be a wonderful tenant. Dorothea would continue to go out and make house calls. One of her patients was Esther Busby. Esther kept getting hospitalized with a mysterious illness. She would be fine, get sick, be fine, get sick again, and it seemed like, weird thing, she was only getting sick when Dorothea Puente was around. How about that? One of the doctors got worried about Esther and actually contacted APS, Adult Protective Services. He was suspicious of Puente. He also ordered blood tests to be done, and they found a high level of phenobarbital in her system. Dorothea lied and told Esther's family that Esther was dying of cancer, and that's why she was taking care of her. But what she was actually doing was drugging her and slowly draining all of Esther's money. Eventually, Esther declined so much that she was put into a nursing facility. And at one point, Dorothea came and visited her. She brought her food, and Esther immediately became sick again. This time, Dorothea Puente's actions were lethal. And this is the first confirmed time that we know without a doubt that Dorothea Puente murdered. Esther died, and once again, the doctors were suspicious, but they couldn't prove anything, apparently. So Dorothea Puente continued on with her schemes and murders. In 1981, she targeted Dorothy Gosling. Dorothy survived, but would later recount when Dorothea was around, she would often pass out and wake up to stolen items. So Gosling survived, but she was definitely a victim. January 16th, 1982, another victim, Malcolm McKenzie. So McKenzie was the 74-year-old guy that Puente met at the Zebra Club in Midtown. She accompanied him back to his apartment. They had been drinking, and he began feeling unwell. It seemed Puente had put something into his drink. She basically paralyzed him. He was like eyes wide open but couldn't move his body and was just in this haze on the couch. And while he was in this stupor, she stole his cash, his penny collection, and his jewelry, all while he just watched her do it, unable to move. Before she left, she coldly approached McKenzie, noticing the diamond ring on his finger. She pulled it off and left. He laid alone on his couch for hours, probably not knowing if he was going to survive. But eventually the drugs did wear off, and Mackenzie immediately called the police. They caught Dorothea trying to cash 2 of his checks. Once again, you would think that this would be a time that Dorothea would be tried and put in prison. She was arrested and released just a couple days later, saying this was all a misunderstanding. Like, what the hell is going on? 1 week after her assault and robbery of Mackenzie, Dorothea had also already found her next victim, an 82-year-old woman named Irene Gregory. She gave Irene a false name, telling her that she was Bethany Peterson. She drugged Irene and robbed her. She took a bunch of her medications, too, including sleeping pills, and she would later use these on other victims. Claire Malaville and Loretta Calmers also suffered a similar fate, but they were too sick and elderly to testify in court. Dorothea knew exactly who to target, and in my opinion, law enforcement, society also taught her that she could get away with these things, and she was. Dorothea's crimes continued to escalate, and by the time it was 1982, she had no doubt become a cold-blooded killer. In late 1982, Puente met 61-year-old Ruth Monroe. Ruth's son, Bill Clausen, remembers Ruth fondly. She raised 5 children on her own after losing her husband. She was a good mother, she was a great grandmother, and was known to be a very upbeat woman and healthy. She had gotten a clean bill of health from her doctor just 1 month before she would move in with Dorothea. Ruth Monroe met Dorothea through Harold, one of Puente's co-workers at this restaurant, because Dorothea was also working as a cook. This woman has so many jobs, I can't keep up. Ruth and Harold fell in love and later got married. Ruth and Dorothea became good friends during this time, and they even opened a catering business together. Dorothea also opened this little cafe with the help of Ruth under their joint bank account. Ruth was falling for Dorothea's lies, and Dorothea was playing the long game. She developed a long-term friendship with Ruth before anything would happen to her. In early 1982, Ruth's husband, Harold, started having health issues. He was diagnosed with cancer, and his health declined so much that he needed 24-hour care. He was living in a hospital, and Ruth was very depressed and lonely. So, Dorothea suggested that Ruth move in with her. On Easter Sunday, 1982, Ruth moved in. Shortly before she moved in, Ruth went in for that annual doctor's checkup. She was super healthy. Everything was great. 2 weeks after moving in with Dorothea, Ruth Monroe would die. Bill, Ruth's son, would stop by and visit Ruth regularly after leaving work. He would later say in a documentary interview, quote, "The last 3 days of her life, she seemed like she was getting sick. And when I went there, I noticed she had a drink in her hand. And my mom did not drink. So I asked her, I said, 'What is that?' And she said it was a drink that Dorothea fixed her to calm her nerves." This became a regular occurrence. It seemed like every single time Ruth's kids, 'cause she had a daughter as well, would go to visit her, they would see a creme de la menthe drink in her hand. And Ruth was getting worse and worse every time her kids would come visit her. She became so sick that one day when Bill showed up, she was nearly catatonic. Bill also had no idea that Dorothea was the one who was doing all of this. He thought that she was just getting sick and that she was overcome with grief from what was happening to Bill's father. Bill thought Ruth was in good hands. After all, she had told the family that she was a nurse, and she had been friends with Ruth for some time. She had built a lot of trust with Ruth and her family. Each time Bill left, he would assure her, "Don't worry, Dorothea's taking care of you. You're in good hands." Ruth was in such bad shape, she was unable to tell Bill that she needed help. Ruth died on April 28, 1982. The cause of death was respiratory depression due to a massive overdose of codeine. Dorothea claimed Ruth had killed herself because she was so depressed about her husband's illness. But if you look at the evidence, this didn't make any sense, because when police arrived, they would find that this Tylenol and codeine wasn't anywhere near Ruth's body. It was in another room entirely in the house, and we know that Ruth was bedridden. Additionally, when the autopsy on Ruth's body was done, it was clear that Ruth Monroe had some liver damage and that she had not eaten for several days. The only thing in her stomach was creme de menthe. Ruth's death at this time was listed as undetermined. Ruth's children were suspicious. They knew their mother wouldn't have and wasn't capable of killing herself, but no one was investigating Ruth's death. And so, Dorothea Puente continued to house the elderly and disabled tenants in her boarding house. While they lived there, she read their mail and took any money and Social Security checks that they received. She paid each of them monthly stipends, but kept the remainder for what she claimed were expenses for the boarding house. Over the next several years, law enforcement would visit Dorothea Puente's boarding house, ordering her to stay away from elderly persons and not to handle government checks. But nothing would happen. They would basically just show up and be like, "Hey, stop doing that. Okay, cool." And despite these frequent visits, she was never charged with anything. So Dorothea continued to drug and rob people. In one of her sprees in the early 1980s, she drugged 3 women with tranquilizers, stole checks, money, and valuables from their homes. One of these victims was a 49-year-old woman named Dorothy Osborne. 2 of these victims were also hospitalized, and medical testing revealed high levels of unprescribed drugs in their systems. These attacks led to Dorothea getting arrested again, and this was largely because Dorothy Osborne took samples of the remnants of the drink that Dorothea had dosed her with, and she personally brought it to the police station. She brought them the evidence on a silver platter. And Dorothea was arrested May 19th, 1982, while she was in an airport getting ready to flee to Mexico. In August 1982, Dorothea pled guilty to fraud and theft. Not attempted murder, mind you. So, a Superior Court judge sentenced her to just 5 years in prison at the California Institution for Women in Corona. Dorothea was released on good behavior after serving 3 years. She was paroled in 1985 at the age of 56. Shortly before her release, she was evaluated by a state psychologist who diagnosed her as schizophrenic and said, quote, okay, listen to this quote, "This woman is a disturbed woman who does not appear to have remorse or regret for what she has done. She is to be considered dangerous, and her living environment and or employment should be closely monitored." End quote. Disturbed, not capable of remorse, dangerous, needs constant monitoring. But of course, none of this would happen. When Dorothea got out, she went back to the same shit again. She went back to the same house as well, that 2-story powder blue Victorian home. She was preying on vulnerable people, collecting their social security checks, and murdering. This went on for 3 years. She did this without a license. She was in direct violation of her federal probation. According to Sacktown magazine, quote, "Federal probation officers visited her numerous times over the next 2 years without suspecting she ran a business, lulled by her kindly facade and clean home, as much as by her lies that those staying at the house were friends or guests." End quote. Oh yeah, you see these 20 people staying at my house? We're just hanging out. They come and go as they please. They're just friends. Yeah. In the fall of 1986, Betty Mae Palmer, age 78, would arrive at Dorothea Puente's boarding house shortly before she disappeared. Betty Mae Palmer had fallen on hard times. She was having a hard time paying medical bills. On October 14th, 1986, Dorothea stole Betty Mae Palmer's California ID card and put her own photo on top of it. 2 months later, the mailing address on Palmer's Social Security checks was also changed to Dorothea's address. Dorothea would forge Palmer's signature and cashed nearly $7,000 worth of benefit checks belonging to Palmer. On October 21st, 1986, Dorothea summoned a notary to the hospital room of her next victim, Leona Carpenter, age 78. Leona, weird thing, had suffered a flurazepam overdose. I wonder how that happened. Dorothea was given power of attorney over Leona Carpenter. She began cashing her Social Security checks just 10 days later. In December, after Leona Carpenter was released from the hospital because she got better, she went to live with Dorothea. And once again, Leona Carpenter would return to the hospital. Just a few weeks after she was discharged the second time, February 1987, Leona Carpenter disappeared. In February 1987, James Gallup, age 62, moved into Dorothea's home after recovering from a heart attack and brain surgery. Dorothea poisoned his food after he refused to give her financial control. July of 1987, 58-year-old Eugene Gamble was found dead in an apparent suicide in her home, having overdosed, quote-unquote, on amitriptyline and ethanol. Dorothea said that he had a history of suicide attempts. Sounds a lot like what happened to Ruth Monroe. On October 2nd, 1987, Vera Faye Martin, age 64, was also sent to live with Dorothea. Vera Faye Martin was a mother, and she was poisoned after living in Dorothea's home just one day. Beginning on October 5th, 1987, Dorothea forged a number of Vera Faye Martin's social security checks, totaling over $7,000. On October 19th, 1987, Vera Faye Martin failed to contact her daughter on her birthday, as she did every year. Her daughter and other family grew worried and suspicious, but nothing came of the missing persons report. On October 21st, 1987, Dorothy Miller, age 64, was placed in an upstairs flat in Puente's home. She was a Native American Army veteran, and she moved in because she had been suffering from alcoholism, night terrors, and PTSD. So she just wanted help. Dorothy also enjoyed reciting poems, and she was known to be very gentle. Just a few weeks after Dorothy moved in with Dorothea, she disappeared. On November 20th, 1987, Dorothea hired a carpet cleaner to remove a, quote, large pile of foul-smelling slime out of Dorothy Miller's room. Dorothea continued to forge Miller's checks, totaling over $11,000. On November 29th, 1987, Brenda Trujillo sent a letter to the Social Security office in Sacramento accusing Dorothea of stealing her Social Security checks, totaling $3,500. Trujillo had met Dorothea in the Sacramento County Jail in 1982, and the two had later been cellmates. So she was even taking victims while she was in prison. Dorothea never stopped. After Trujillo's release, she moved into Dorothea's boarding house, where Dorothea had helped her apply for Social Security benefits. Trujillo claimed that Dorothea drugged her and called her parole officer, resulting in her parole being revoked and preventing her from receiving the checks. The next victim was 55-year-old Benjamin Fink. Fink also struggled with alcoholism and pulmonary issues. We don't know much about him, but he disappeared in April 1988. Endless victims and secrets, and all things that were preventable. The deaths of these vulnerable people were so preventable. It's so sad and enraging and frustrating. So many opportunities that law enforcement had to intervene and put a stop to what Dorothea was clearly doing over and over and over. But no, this went on for nearly 2 decades. Finally, in November of 1988, someone did their job, and Dorothea's house of cards would come tumbling down. In November of 1988, a social worker showed up on Dorothea Puente's doorstep in Sacramento, California, just 1 mile from the Capitol and the Hall of Justice. The social worker, Judy Moyes, was looking for one of Puente's tenants, 51-year-old Bert Montoya. Bert had stopped showing up to his social work meetings, and this was his last known address. After speaking with Dorothea, Judy Moyes was on high alert. Something was not right. Dorothea was being evasive. Her answers didn't make any sense. So Judy would end up contacting the police, who arrived soon after this with a warrant and shovels. This would lead to days of digging in Dorothea's back garden, and nearly a 30-year secret finally coming to light. So Bert Montoya was intellectually disabled and had schizophrenia. Bert was known to be very gentle, and he spent a lot of time on the streets and various homeless shelters. 13 years before he met Dorothea, he had actually been living with his parents in New Orleans, Louisiana. He wandered off one day, and his parents searched, but they were never able to track him down. They had no idea what had happened to him. Bert spent some time living on the streets and all over the U.S. until he ended up in Sacramento. He met Dorothea Puente. Bert lovingly called Dorothea Mama and quickly became very trusting of her. But after living with her for a short while, Bert grew scared. Shortly before he disappeared, he told one of his social workers, a different one, not the one who knocked on Dorothea's door, Judy Moyes, someone else that they don't name, but he tells this social worker that he was worried and scared because Dorothea had been force-feeding him pills that made him sleepy. So it's at this point that the social worker calls Dorothea, not the police, calls Dorothea concerned, and this obviously enraged Dorothea, and she went into her usual lies. She denied this entirely, said that Bert was a liar, and without doing anything else, this social worker fell for Dorothea's charm and deception, and the social worker actually sent Bert back to live with Dorothea and told him to apologize to her. And that was the last time that Bert Montoya would be seen alive. So once again, the systems that we have in place are failing these people. Law enforcement failed these people. The social workers failed these people. The judicial system failed these people, failed Dorothea. She should have been in jail a long time ago, okay? But no one was really looking for Bert Montoya at this time that he disappeared. According to an article from Sacktown magazine, given Montoya's history as a transient, his disappearance would have escaped notice without the persistence of Judy Moyes. An outreach counselor with Volunteers of America, she had visited Puente before placing him in her care. In October 1988, discovering he no longer lived at the house, Moyes began to hound Puente about his departure. Her evasive answers, first claiming he had traveled to Mexico, then that he had returned and moved to Utah, tripped Moyes' suspicion. She filed a missing person report with police on November 7th. End quote. So in November, Dorothea Puente asked Donald Anthony, a former convict who had worked for her, to contact Judy Moyes, pretending to be Bert Montoya's brother-in-law. He went under a false name and called Judy, claiming that everything was fine and he had taken Bert to Utah. But Judy Moyes was not buying this. She was still suspicious, and she told Dorothea that she was going to call the police. 3 days later, November 10th, the social worker received a letter, allegedly from Bert Montoya's brother-in-law. The letter was really weird, and it was wrapped in paper towel to avoid fingerprints. Not suspicious at all. During this time, Puente would also take in and harm another tenant, who we do not know much about, but this was 55-year-old Benjamin Fink, and I think I briefly mentioned him in part 1, but he disappeared while all of this investigation with Bert was going on. Dorothea had grown sloppy and desperate. She was taking in more and more victims and cashing more and more checks that were really close together, and it just so happened that Bert Montoya would be the victim that would bring her house of cards tumbling down. So regarding the disappearance of Bert Montoya, police arrived on November 11th, 1988 to interview Dorothea. They also spoke with John Sharp, one of Dorothea's tenants. Sharp told police initially in front of Dorothea that everything Dorothea was saying was true. Montoya had gone to Utah. He left on his own volition. But just before the cop left, John Sharp, in secret, slipped a piece of paper to the police. He made sure that Dorothea wasn't around, and the cop uncrumbled the paper and took a look. The note would say, "She's making me lie for her." So police knew, finally, that they were onto something big. Sharp would also later go down to the police station and agree to give them more information. In this interview, John Sharp would tell police that sometime earlier, another tenant had vanished after Dorothea, quote, went to his room to make him feel better. It is believed that this was 55-year-old Benjamin Fink. After this tenant vanished, John Sharp kept noticing a putrid odor in the house. Dorothea was like, "Oh, it's nothing, don't worry about it, it's just the sewer, it's backed up, I'm gonna get it fixed, blah, blah, blah." But this smell was so bad that it started to spread outdoors, and even the neighbors were complaining. John Sharp also told police that Dorothea had been hiring prisoners on work furlough to dig and fill large holes in the back garden, and that some of the holes had been covered with concrete. So now police have enough to get a search warrant and dig in the backyard. They showed up with 2 shovels after they got a tip from a local that mounds of loose dirt were in Dorothea's garden that kind of looked like a burial mound. Dorothea opened her front door with her grandmotherly demeanor, feathered white hair, tight smile, and large-rimmed glasses. She kindly and incredibly calmly greeted police, saying she had been expecting them. Come on in. She then admitted she was in violation of her parole as for running the boarding house. She had not been permitted to do this due to being on probation for that fraud charge back from 1985. Police would take a look around the two-story Victorian home, but nothing was amiss. There were no signs of any kind of foul play. The house was immaculate. And police also couldn't help but notice the impressive photos that lined Dorothea's walls. There were photos of her dancing with California governors at fundraisers. Then police would go to the back garden. This was an entirely different story from what was found, or the lack of what was found, in the house. They saw Dorothea's carefully manicured vegetable and flower gardens, but there were also large amounts of loose dirt. After Dorothea gave the police permission, the three men began to dig around in the garden. Like I said, there were three men, and they had only brought 2 shovels. So they borrowed one from Dorothea. And after borrowing Dorothea Puente's shovel, police would hit what they first thought was a tree root. But after loosening the dirt some more, they would discover this was not a tree root, but very clearly a human leg bone. Dorothea looked at them seemingly stunned, with her hand over her mouth like, oh my God, I had no idea that was there. Girl, are we serious right now? It was at this point that police had to halt the dig because they needed to bring in a forensic search team, and this wouldn't be able to happen until the next day. Meanwhile, police brought Dorothea downtown for questioning, but she continued to deny having any idea how that leg bone got there. That's just so weird. I didn't do it. She also maintained that other people lived in the home while she had been in prison, so someone else must have put that leg there. Legally, logistically, she did have a point. There were no signs of foul play in the home, and police could not directly prove at this point that the leg was tied to Dorothea. So police knew they needed more. The next day, when police would return to the house, seas of reporters and onlookers had filled the neighborhood. The news had already spread, and Dorothea was getting nervous. At one point, as police continued to dig, Dorothea asked police if she could go get a cup of coffee. So in the middle of a disappearance, and now seemingly a homicide investigation, what do police do? Do they tell her, no, Dorothea, we're looking for bodies in your backyard, so you can't leave? No, of course not. Police walked her personally to the hotel, and this would lead to public outrage, understandably, for the police department, and an infamous photo of Dorothea arm in arm with a police officer in this bright red long pea coat, carrying a pink umbrella, leaving the house. And this was obviously a ruse. Dorothea did go into the hotel, but she then used a payphone to call a taxi, and she fled the area. During this time, police were unearthing more remains, and they knew when they found more human remains, oh shit, I guess we should go check on Dorothea and bring her back. Obviously, it was too late. So then police had to contact the FBI, and Dorothea Puente became a wanted fugitive for 5 days. They couldn't find this woman for 5 days. Meanwhile, a local came by during the search and told police Dorothea had paid him cash to dig holes all over her backyard, telling him she just needed help so she could, quote, bury some trash. That's what she referred to these people as. Trash. So this man was able to point out where he had dug. And ultimately, police would unearth 6 more bodies. So 7 in total. The third body found was Bert Montoya, the missing tenant that social worker Judy Moyes had come searching for. He was found under a concrete basin in the yard. His mother, who was 92 years old, was notified. She had been searching for Bert for the last 13 years. And while this was worst case scenario, Bert's mom was very thankful to know what had happened. The final body was found on November 14th, 1988. This body was just a few feet from the sidewalk. This victim was missing her head, her hands, and feet, and the whereabouts of those body parts remain unknown to this day. This body was later identified, though, as Betty Mae Palmer. Next to her body was the statue of the patron saint of missing things, Saint Anthony, the patron saint of missing things, further demonstrating how evil Dorothea truly was. The victims were all in an advanced state of decomposition, wrapped up tightly in bed sheets and duct tape, making it even harder for them to be identified. These bed sheets also came from inside the home. Thursday, November 17th, investigators tracked down fugitive and serial killer Dorothea Puente after a man cited her at a bar in Los Angeles, nearly 400 miles away. When Dorothea was arrested, she declined to make a statement. She was wearing her bright red coat, and she was booked into the county jail. The victims would later be identified as 4 females, 3 males, ages 52 to 79, and several of these victims had actually been referred to Dorothea by their social workers. They were homeless or estranged from their families, struggling with addiction, so people often were not looking for them. And when they were, Dorothea would just claim that they had run away or they were just visiting family. Most of these victims also did not have their teeth. Dorothea had pulled their teeth out, making it even harder for them to be identified. But ultimately, all of these victims were identified and given a proper burial. Police later came to believe Dorothea Puente had been lacing her tenants' food and drinks, giving them a lethal mix of drugs or poisoning them, and then scheming and collecting their Social Security checks. By doing this, she brought in about $5,000 a month, or about $20,000 in today's money. Toxicology reports would reveal that the 7 tenants who were found in the back garden had a variety of drugs in their systems: anticonvulsants, antidepressants, antipsychotics, painkillers, and tranquilizers. But the one drug that was always present in all of these victims was Dalmane, a sedative that none of these victims had been prescribed. But you know who did have this prescription? Dorothea Puente. In fact, she had obtained this prescription more than 36 times. She was given 30 pills at a time in each of these prescriptions. Between October 1985 and November 1988, according to court records, she was prescribed Dalmane. So, in theory, this blend of narcotics detected in the victims could have proven lethal, or at least weakened them to the point of defenselessness. Think about those victims we talked about in part 1 that were like catatonic and paralyzed. It's then believed after this that Dorothea likely suffocated these victims with a pillow or blanket, which is a nearly untraceable cause of death. But this is not always what was done. It was determined that at least 2 of these victims had been buried alive. And it's believed that this was because these victims refused to hand over their financials to Dorothea. So if they didn't listen, didn't follow her orders, they were killed in an incredibly cold manner. Dalmane, when combined with alcohol, can put you in this catatonic and ultimately stop the heart as well. So then we get to the trial. February 9th, 1993, so it took quite some time, Dorothea was put on trial for 9 murders. They found 7 victims in the back garden, but they added Ruth Monroe and Everson GILLMOUTH, who we haven't even talked about yet. Remember Ruth Monroe, who we talked about in part 1, her death had initially been ruled a suicide, even though the drugs that killed her were found in another room and she was bedridden. This other victim, Everson GILLMOUTH, was 77 years old. He was from Oregon, and he went by Gil. Gil was a wood and leather worker and had become pen pals with Dorothea while she was serving her 3-year prison sentence for fraud back in '85. And he was lonely. He just wanted to get married. So he fell for Dorothea's charm. And when she got released in '85, he picked her up from prison in his red 1980s Ford pickup truck. And then he started staying at the boarding house that same year. Within months, Gil's family stopped hearing from him. In October 1985, Dorothea also sent a letter to Gil's sister saying that they were in love and they were going to be getting married soon. Dorothea said the wedding was going to be on November 2nd. Then her sister got another letter, And this one was especially strange. It didn't seem like it was from her brother, even though that's what the letter was claiming. So Gil, allegedly in this letter, wrote that the wedding was off. It didn't work out. The next letter that Gil's sister got was from this woman called Irene. This was a new woman that Gil had just met and fallen in love with. Irene was writing to let the sister know that they were in love and that Gil had just had a stroke, but she was taking care of him and everything was fine. That same month, Dorothea Puente hired a handyman, Ismael Flores, to install wood paneling in her home. After he completed the job, Dorothea Puente paid him an additional $800 and gave him a red 1980s Ford pickup truck, Gil's car. She told Flores that the truck belonged to her boyfriend who had given it to her. Dorothea Puente also hired Flores to build a box for her. The box was 6 feet by 3 feet by 2 feet, and she said that she wanted to use this box to store books and other items. But this was a coffin. She and Flores then traveled in this red pickup truck, and Flores agreed to help her unload the box into a storage shed. But then along the way, the plans changed, and she was like, oh, actually, can we just drop this box in the river over here? And Flores is like, what? I just built this box for you, and like, it has all this stuff in it. And she's like, no, I just filled it with junk that I don't want. So on January 1st, 1986, after this box had been dumped in a river, the box was found by a local fisherman who called the police. When police arrived and opened the box, they found the decomposed remains of an unidentified elderly male. During this time, Dorothea Puente continued to collect Gil's pension and forge letters to his family. His body was later identified when Dorothea was on the run for those 5 days as a fugitive in LA. In the trial, Dorothea admitted to burying 7 of her tenants and collecting their Social Security checks, but denied murdering them or murdering Ruth Monroe or Everson GILLMOUTH. And we see this constantly with serial killers and like serial rapists. They'll do a partial admission of guilt and then they'll like deny certain things to try to make themselves look better. So she was like, yeah, like I buried them and I took their money, but they just died because they killed themselves or they died of natural causes. Like I didn't do that. And I needed the money to help people. Such a sick, sadistic woman. Ruth Monroe's son, Bill Clausen, also testified during Dorothea's trial and later recalled how cold Dorothea's stare was. She was like looking at him with these dead eyes, and all that Bill could think about throughout the trial was how badly he wanted to strangle her. A psychiatrist also diagnosed Dorothea during this time as suffering from antisocial personality disorder. And if you remember in part 1, a psychiatrist diagnosed her as schizophrenic and said she was an incredibly dangerous individual. I believe there was also an earlier point where she was also diagnosed with schizophrenia. So she's been, I believe, diagnosed twice by experts as schizophrenic, and then this other expert as being antisocial with this personality disorder. So this expert speculated that running a boarding house began for Dorothea as a humane endeavor rooted in a deep desire to undo painful childhood trauma. Then, on the other hand, when these tenants wouldn't do what she wanted, she would kill them in incredibly sick and twisted ways. On August 26th, 1993, after 24 days of deliberation, that's the longest deliberation, by the way, in a murder case in the state's history, the jury would find Dorothea Puente guilty of 3 murders. Not 9, just 3. They were gridlocked on the others, including Ruth Monroe. There was a mistrial. And obviously this deeply upset Ruth Monroe's family, but they also grew to accept it because they knew she would be behind bars for the rest of her life. They didn't do any other trials, ultimately because of cost. Prosecutor John O'Mara would say, quote, "Here's this grandmotherly figure in this beautiful, restored Victorian home with all these azaleas and other flowers. And then there's the contradiction. Beneath this house, there are all these bodies. It doesn't fit," end quote. That just goes to show that these people walk among us. It's harmful to condition yourself to think that these are obvious monsters, that they're inhuman. It's naive. I understand why we do it, but it's just not the case. During Dorothea's time in prison, she remained in the limelight as well. And it's at this point in the episode that I want to kind of shift and start talking about the unethical and disturbing sensationalism surrounding Dorothea. So she released a cookbook in 2004 called Cooking with a Serial Killer. This book can be found on Amazon. I want to read you the description of the book first, and then we're going to talk about some reviews that people have left for this book. So the description reads, quote, "Grandmotherly Dorothea Puente is becoming as renowned for her cooking as for being a notorious mass murderer, serial killer, and all-around psycho. Dorothea Puente has been accused of a lot of things. Being a bad cook isn't one of them. You see, Dorothea ran a boarding house in Sacramento, California, and the care she provided was above and beyond other care providers. But one thing everyone involved in this case keyed in on was how awesome all of her tenants thought the cooking was. One tenant went as far as saying every dinner at Dorothea's was like Thanksgiving dinner. None of them were murdered. They died of natural causes. I couldn't do that to someone. I couldn't do that anyhow. I'm not that type of person. I'm too caring and I worry too much about my people eating. Everybody can tell you that. Why would I spend money fattening them up if I was going to kill them? Signed, Dorothea Puente." I will never understand why we give people like this platforms. Why should they be allowed to publish books, make money, do films? Like, no, bitch. No. This book also has hundreds of 5-star reviews. People left reviews like, "The book didn't cost me an arm or leg." Okay? "Great conversation starter. Love her or hate her. Now we can make someone's last meal. LOL." I also found a lot of people who were like, found out about this cookbook from Bailey Sarian's video and I just had to buy it because I just love true crime. Can we wake up? I know I get on a soapbox a lot about true crime ethics, but this is so disgusting. Are we serious? In 2008, Dorothea also met with Sacktown magazine journalist, and she continued to say, and she would say this forever, that she was innocent. She said this for the rest of her life. She died on March 27th, 2011 at the age of 82 while staying in a women's prison in Chowchilla, taking her secrets with her to the grave. There is reason to believe, and I totally think that this is what happened, that Dorothea had an accomplice. We know that she hired a lot of people to bury holes for her and stuff. But it would have been very difficult for her to have dismembered people, killed them, moved the bodies, done all of that on her own. And that's a mystery in this case. We don't know who this accomplice or accomplices could have been. We don't know how much the tenants knew. But we do know that the sensationalism around Dorothea Puente has continued. In 2020, the play Dorothea Puente Tells All hit California stages. Why we need a play about this woman, I could not tell you. This play was written by Mark Lowenstern, and I will say it does seem like he found some ways to honor the victims, but I still am just dude, we don't need a play about this. Why? It doesn't seem like the victims were involved in this production either, like the victims' families. In a 2025 article from Capradio by Patty Roberts, the play is described as follows, quote, "It's one of Sacramento's most famous true crime stories, which intrigued playwright Mark Lowenstern about the many scams and manipulations Dorothea pulled, not just on her victims, but on many other people, including government officials. I was interested in how she got so many people to love and admire her while she was doing so much damage," said Lowenstern in a previous interview, "and the terrible hunger she had for people to believe the exalted image of herself that she had created." Lowenstern went with the fascinating choice to have the character of Dorothea come out. face the audience with her deflecting charm and declare that it is her story to tell. The play goes back and forth from Dorothea justifying her side to the cast of 8 actors portraying other real people involved, including victims, social workers, a parole officer, a policeman, a neighbor, and a reporter. Director Jackie Martin uses costumes which include Dorothea's famous red coat, videos that honor the victims, and real local news stories of the unfolding crime. I understand that the media can be very effective in getting important messages across, but I'm sorry, in my opinion, I just feel that this play is like completely unnecessary. I don't understand why this was needed for people to see. If this was like a museum exhibit dedicated to the victims and had like a lot of pictures of them and like messages from family and their stories, I feel like that would be interesting to see. But it just seems too sensationalized and too focused on Dorothea when that's not what this should really be about. In addition to the play, the cookbook, all of these interviews, there is also Dorothea Puente's Victorian house in Sacramento. Dorothea's house is now considered a historic site. It has the same original flooring. They're very proud of that. And the home has become a very popular tourist attraction. Ghost Adventures, Zach Baggins, not fond of that guy, also did an episode about the house and said it was allegedly haunted. The owners of the house have also more than leaned into the dark history of the house, saying in the docuseries World's Most Evil Killers, quote, "We love it. We have no problem whatsoever with any of it. So this is just our house. We made it a home and we're pretty happy with it." End quote. On their mailbox, they also proudly display a sign with a picture of the house that says, "It was that awful, awful woman that did it. Don't blame us. Signed the house." This really made me angry. They have a sign that hangs on the outside of the house that reads, "Trespassers will be drugged and buried in the yard." Ha ha, don't you get it? It's really funny, guys. No, come on, it's funny. T-shirts have also been sold with drawings of Dorothea with a shovel in her hand and the phrase, "I dig it." Okay? This is the issue that I have with true crime, is shit like this. Dorothea Puente's story has also been mentioned in the Netflix series Worst Roommate Ever, and it was used as the backdrop of Dorothea, a campy, low-budget horror film that premiered in North Hollywood on Halloween. So between the house, the cookbooks, the low-budget horror movies, I think it's pretty clear that we have an ethical dilemma on our hands. I have spent many episodes talking about this perplexing phenomenon. Why are we so fascinated with serial killers? And yes, I also recognize that this could come across as hypocritical. I just spent 2 episodes talking about this woman, but I think there is a big difference between telling the story and sensationalizing. The truth is, in death and in life, these victims deserved so much better. Their stories deserve to be told in a delicate and meaningful way. They're not a punchline, a cookbook, a tourist attraction. These were parents, siblings, grandparents, kind people in the community who were willing to get help. They lived entire lives and touched many people before this sadistic and cold woman murdered them or took advantage of them, drugged them. And yet, source after source after source that I came across during my research was all about seemingly idolizing Dorothea Puente. In part 1, we named all of the victims and talked at length about them. It was actually pretty hard to track down information about the victims in most of the sources that I came across. By and large, most of these sources did not even include the victims' names. So perhaps this is a full circle moment. Dorothea Puente remained undetected for years because she had a keen ability to blend seamlessly into society. She was a grandmotherly, charming figure. And when we think about serial killers, we often think that they'll stick out like a sore thumb, that they're inhuman, they're monsters. But what is scarier, and the truth, is these people walk amongst us and live in our communities. Unlike outwardly violent psychopaths as well, like Ted Bundy or Richard Ramirez, there are high-functioning psychopaths out there that use charm, deception, and intelligence to manipulate people. And this was Dorothea Puente. She was a Black Widow type of killer. She used social engineering, a psychological manipulation technique that exploits people's trusts to maintain her secret life. Her motive was purely survival and financial. She saw these victims as subhuman. But these victims were anything but. And those are the people that we need to remember. So I guess what I'm saying is, it's pretty ironic that this woman spent 30 years going undetected, getting away with her crimes because she was so charming, seemingly. And now, in a way, the media is doing the same thing. They're putting this woman on a macabre and dark, but a pedestal. Do you get what I'm saying? I don't know. It's upsetting in stories like this that there are people that come out of the woodwork and try to sensationalize the house as well. There's like a mannequin of Dorothea on the front door, arm in arm with a mannequin police officer in her like red coat. It's just gross to me. So I have spent the last several weeks on this case, and I'm going to take a much needed break now, but that is the story of the death house landlady, female serial killer, Dorothea Puente. And thank you to that TikTok user, Ridgeback Mom, for bringing awareness to me about this case. I think they initially were specifically talking about how the house was haunted. I didn't watch the Ghost Adventures episode. Don't get me wrong, sometimes I watch things like that, but in this case, it just didn't feel right. I think that this is an example of sensationalism, and I think that these victims deserved much better. I think that the police should have put Dorothea away so many times before we got to 1988. But that is the perplexing story of Dorothea Puente. Thank you guys very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you enjoyed the way this was told, let me know. If you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment down below, like this video, subscribe. It helps the show. Share this story with someone for awareness. And if you are listening on a podcast platform, you can hit that follow button, leave a 5-star review. That's by and large how I get new listeners. It boosts me up the algorithms. I know it's annoying, me talking about this, hitting the buttons, blah, blah, blah. I hate it. But I am a cog in the machine at the end of the day with stuff like this. So it's very helpful. Thanks in advance for that. And if you want to support the show further, there's tons of support links down below. You can get early ad-free episodes and nearly 100 pieces of bonus content over on the Perplexed Society. So that is my Patreon. That's patreon.com/Perplexity Mystery Podcast. My merch links, my Buy Me a Coffee link, all those things are down below. So that's much appreciated. And if not, also totally understand. I just appreciate you being here and listening. You all are amazing. I hope you have a great week. Please stay safe, and I will talk to you next week. Bye. Perplexity, a Mystery Podcast, is hosted, written, and produced by me, Kadra Brannon. This show is proud to be a part of the Black Cat Network. Assistant editor is Charlie Leopold. Theme song by Patrick Thompson. All music used in this episode is from Pixabay. If you like the show, be sure to share it with others and leave a 5-star rating and review. Contact, support, and merch links can be found in the episode description. To unlock early ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content, join the Perplexed Society at patreon.com/Perplexity Mystery Podcast. Listener stories, topic requests, and business inquiries can be submitted to perplexitymysterypodcast.com or emailed to perplexitymysterypodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, stay curious.